So as you can see, verses 20, 21, and 22, we're looking at the examples of Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. So we learn about these individuals and we read their stories in the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis. Now, if you've been with us for the duration of this series, you've noticed that all of these people that we've talked about so far, Noah, Enoch, Abel, Abraham, Sarah, and today the ones we're going to talk about, Isaac and Jacob and Joseph, all of their stories we read about in the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis. So that's why I had you open your Bible to Genesis 25, because I want to start there in Genesis 25. We're not going to end there, but I want us to start there as we consider the first illustration of faith, the example of Isaac. So Genesis 25, starting with verse 19, it says this: "These are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham fathered Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Paddan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean, to be his wife. And Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah his wife conceived. The children struggled together within her, and she said, 'If it is thus, why is this happening to me?' So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, 'Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, the older shall serve the younger.' When her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak, so they called his name Esau. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob." So here we see Isaac and Rebekah have twins. And it's revealed to Rebekah that her older son will serve her younger son. Now again, the writer of Hebrews tells us here at verse 20, by faith Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. All right, so keep this in mind. So when Rebekah is pregnant, and there's this struggle of whatever is, this struggle of sorts that's happening in her womb, she goes to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord reveals to her that there's two nations in her womb, and that her older son is going to serve her younger son. So kind of keep that in mind as a little bit of a background, because here the writer of Hebrews talks about Isaac blessing Jacob and Esau. So we find this story in Genesis 27. So if you'll turn over a couple of chapters later to Genesis 27, I want us to read together the story. Now, the writer of Hebrews there's one verse, right? It's one verse here in our English text. By faith, Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. But the story is much, there's much more to it. And so I want us to look at the story as described in Genesis 27, and I want us to start with verse 1. Now I'm going to go ahead and warn you right now, I'm going to read a lot of text here, so hang in there and listen to this story. When Isaac was old, and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, he called Esau his older son and said to him, "My son." And he answered, "Here I am." He said, "Behold, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now then, take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me, and prepare for me delicious food, such as I love, and bring it to me so that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die." Now Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for game and bring it, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "I heard your father speak to your brother Esau. Bring me game and prepare for me delicious food. that I may eat it and bless you before the Lord before I die. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice as I command you. Go to the flock and bring me 2 good young goats, so that I may prepare from them delicious food for your father, such as he loves. And you shall bring it to your father to eat, so that he may bless you before he dies. But Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, behold, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be mocking him, and bring a curse upon myself and not a blessing. His mother said to him, let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice, and go bring them to me. So he went and took them and brought them to his mother, and his mother prepared delicious food, such as his father loved. Then Rebekah took the best garments of Esau, her older son, which were with her in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son. And the skins of the young goats she put on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. And she put the delicious food and the bread which she had prepared into the hand of her son Jacob. So he went in to his father and said, my father. And he said, here I am. Who are you, my son? Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Now sit up and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me. But Isaac said to his son, how is it that you have found it so quickly, my son? He answered, because the Lord your God granted me success. Then Isaac said to Jacob, please come near, that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not. So Jacob went near to Isaac his father, who felt him, and said, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. And he did not recognize him, because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him. He said, are you really my son Esau? He answered, I am. Then he said, bring it near to me, that I may eat of my son's game and bless you. So he brought it near to him, and he ate, and he brought him wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, come near and kiss me, my son. So he came near and kissed him. And Isaac smelled the smell of his garments, and blessed him, and said, see, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. As soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, when Jacob had scarcely gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, Esau his brother came in from his hunting. He also prepared delicious food and brought it to his father. And he said to his father, let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that you may bless me. His father Isaac said to him, who are you? He answered, I am your son, your firstborn Esau. Then Isaac trembled very violently and said, who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? And I ate it all before you came, and I have blessed him. Yes, and he shall be blessed. As soon as Esau heard the words of his father, he cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry, and said to his father, bless me, even me also, O my father. But he said, your brother came deceitfully, and he has taken away your blessing. Esau said, is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has cheated me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he has taken away my blessing. Then he said, have you not reserved a blessing for me? Isaac answered and said to Esau, behold, I have made him lord over you, and all his brothers I have given to him for servants. And with grain and wine I have sustained him. What then can I do for you, my son? Esau said to his father, have you but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. Then Isaac his father answered and said to him, behold, away from the fatness of the earth shall your dwelling be, and away from the dew of heaven on high. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother, but when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck. Now, this story is a story of deception. When you consider the actions of Rebekah, Isaac's wife, and Jacob, Isaac's son, it's a story of deception. They're deceiving Isaac. Now remember in Genesis 25 that the Lord had given information to Rebekah that her older son would serve her younger son. So to what extent is this influencing her actions? Isaac is deceived by Rebekah and Jacob, but Hebrews chapter 11 verse 20 says that Isaac's actions were by faith. Right there. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 20. By faith, Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. Now this was clearly the Lord's plan. Even though we see here in Genesis 27 that there's deception on the part of Rebekah and her son Jacob to steal the blessing that belonged to the firstborn Esau, this was clearly the Lord's plan. In fact, the Apostle Paul comments in Romans 9, and here's what he says. And not only so, but also when Rebekah had conceived children by one man, our forefather Isaac, though they were not yet born and had done nothing either good or bad, in order that God's purpose of election might continue, not because of works, but because of him who calls, she was told, the older will serve the younger, as it is written, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. So Paul's clear in Romans 9 that this wasn't that one had done good and the other had done bad. I mean, they're still in the womb. They haven't even been born yet, and yet God has chosen Jacob. Now, the writer of Hebrews wants us to know Isaac acted in faith, and in acting in faith, Isaac fulfilled the Lord's will. He blessed his sons, believing that the Lord would keep his promises. Now, Isaac knew that the Lord had been faithful to him, and by faith he blessed his sons. So let's look more closely at this son, Jacob, because in the very next verse, verse 21 in Hebrews 11, it says, by faith Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff. Now, if you recall, in Genesis 27, we're told Isaac was old. When Isaac spoke to Esau, he said, I do not know the day of my death. So as Isaac is nearing the end of his life, he blesses his sons, Jacob and Esau. Well, now here in Hebrews 11 verse 21, the writer of Hebrews is telling us that Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph. Now, if you go toward the end of the book of Genesis, all right, you got to go almost to the very end, not the very end, but almost to the end, Genesis chapter 48. Genesis 48 recounts for us the story of Jacob blessing the sons of Joseph. Now, those sons were named Manasseh and Ephraim. And so these two sons of Joseph are specifically blessed by Jacob. So let me read, beginning with Genesis chapter 48, verse 8. It says, when Israel saw Joseph's sons, by the way, Jacob is also known as Israel. Now, when we say Israel, we probably typically are referring to the nation of Israel, the descendants of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Jacob is also given the name Israel. So you'll see these two names, Jacob and Israel, it's referring to the same person. So when Israel saw Joseph's sons, he said, who are these? Joseph said to his father, these are my sons, whom God has given me here. And he said, bring them to me, please, that I may bless them. Now the eyes of Israel were dim with age, so that he could not see. So Joseph brought them near him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, I never expected to see your face, and behold, God has let me see your offspring also. Then Joseph removed them from his knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near him. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on the head of Manasseh, crossing his hands, for Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph and said, the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, The God who has been my shepherd all my life long to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the boys, and in them let my name be carried on. And the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. When Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him, and he took his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, "Not this way, my father, since this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he, his offspring shall become a multitude of nations." So he blessed them that day, saying, "By you Israel will pronounce blessings, saying, God make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh." Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. So here we see the writer of Hebrews tells us, by faith Jacob blessed the sons of Joseph. He trusted in the God who had provided for him. Now, this son, Joseph, who Jacob blesses his sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, Joseph is now given as an example in the very next verse, Hebrews 11:22. And here's what the writer of Hebrews says. By faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave directions concerning his bones. Now, the story of Joseph is found in Genesis 37 through 50. So a large section of the book of Genesis is devoted to the story of Joseph. Now, there's a little bit of a break in the story, so it's not like the whole of that section is devoted to Joseph, but the vast majority of it is devoted to Joseph. And perhaps you're familiar with the story of Joseph. Joseph had dreams that irritated his brothers. Joseph was very much disliked by his brothers. Joseph was the favored son. Jacob favored Joseph. And as a display of his feelings toward Joseph, he even gave him a garment that was multicolored. So Joseph is very much disliked by his brothers. And these dreams that Joseph had were very much predictive of what was going to happen. These dreams indicated what was going to happen in the future in Joseph's life, and these dreams amounted to his brothers essentially bowing down to him. Now, if you don't like the guy, right? You don't like the fact that your father favors him. How much are you going to like him when he's having dreams of you bowing down to him? His brothers don't like him. They're jealous of him. So one day they have an opportunity to do something about it. They're off in some other place and they see Joseph coming and they plot to put an end to Joseph. Now, just jumping through some of the details, bottom line of what they did was they sold him. They decided to sell him as a slave. Hey, let's get rid of this guy. So they sold him as a slave. And Joseph is now separated from his father. He's separated from his brothers. He's been sold as a piece of property. And he ends up serving a man named Potiphar. And according to Genesis chapter 39, the Lord was with Joseph as he served Potiphar. So God's blessing Joseph. God's taking care of Joseph. God is with Joseph. Well, Potiphar's wife decides she likes the look of Joseph. And she tries to get Joseph to come to bed with her. Well, Joseph is a God-fearing man. And Joseph is not willing to do this. So Joseph resists the pull of Potiphar's wife. And one day he goes running out of the house. And Potiphar's wife accuses him of misconduct. So Joseph ends up getting thrown in prison. Well, again, Genesis 39 tells us that the Lord was with him when he was imprisoned. Now, while Joseph is imprisoned as a result of being falsely accused of sexual misconduct, two servants of the Pharaoh, are placed in prison, and they both dream dreams. And Joseph interprets those dreams. God gives him understanding, and God allows Joseph to interpret their dreams, and what Joseph said was going to happen, in fact, happened. It was good for one, and it was not so good for the other. So the one that was restored to his position forgot about Joseph, but one day Pharaoh himself dreamed, and he needed an interpretation. So the servant who had been in prison, who'd encountered Joseph, who had his dream accurately interpreted, remembered Joseph, and he informed Pharaoh of Joseph. And so Joseph is called for, and Joseph tells Pharaoh what's going to happen. There's going to be 7 years of great abundance. There's going to be 7 years of prosperity. But then immediately following that, there's going to be 7 years of famine in the land. And so, Pharaoh's pleased. Joseph is brought out of the prison. He is put into high position in that Egyptian government. 7 years of plenty. Sure enough, 7 years of famine. And the family of Jacob, Joseph's dad, all of his brothers, they're experiencing the pain of the famine. But they hear that there's food in Egypt, and so his brothers are sent to Egypt, and just kind of cutting through all the story, there comes a day where Joseph finally reveals himself to his brothers. It's in Genesis chapter 45. And when Joseph reveals his identity to his brothers who have come seeking food, Joseph declares his faith that the Lord had sent him to Egypt. And so I want to pick up Genesis 45, beginning with verse 4. It says, "So Joseph said to his brothers, 'Come near to me, please.' And they came near. And he said, 'I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for,' this is important, 'God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and Lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt.'" Now here's Joseph talking to his brothers who had betrayed him. Talking to his brothers who had sold him as a slave, as a piece of property. Here's the man who had been falsely accused of sexual misconduct and had been thrown into prison. Here's a man who's been separated from his father, from his family, from his homeland, and he says to his brothers, "God sent me before you to preserve life." Is that not a statement of faith? At the end of Genesis, Joseph expresses his faith in the Lord clearly with these words to his brothers. It's Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. He says, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." So even in the face of all that Joseph has experienced, all of the trouble, all of the difficulty, he expresses great faith in the Lord. Someone in our church family this week communicated with me about this. They knew the text that was coming up for this Sunday about Jacob and Isaac and Joseph. And they commented about the fact that, these people had some bad things happen in their lives. And yet they had faith that God would bring good from it. And they applied it to our church family, to our congregation. And indeed, we can do that. We can apply it to our congregational life as a church, but we can also apply it to our everyday lives, to my life, to your life, to whatever you're dealing with. I mean, you look specifically at the example of Joseph and you think, man, he had some hard days. And I know I've commented on this before, maybe about this story and other stories before. Like, we can read the story of Joseph very quickly. I mean, it might take you a little bit of time, but you can get through Genesis 37 through Genesis 50 in a relatively short period of time. But it's one thing for you and I now to read Genesis 37 through 50 and to do so quickly. It's another thing to live it. How long did it take for Joseph to live the events recorded from Genesis 37 to Genesis 50? What was that like? What was that experience? And yet, as he comes to a place where now he's in authority, now he has power, now he has influence, he can say to his brothers who sold him as a piece of property, God sent me here. So no matter what happens to us congregationally, no matter what happens to us at First NSB, whatever turmoil or struggle or difficulty we face, no matter what you face in your life, in your marriage, in your home, in your workplace, with your health, with your finances, can we believe that God really is for us? That God's fully aware that there's absolutely nothing that God is uninformed about? Joseph said it to his brothers, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." God was working in Joseph's life. Do we believe that God is working in our lives? Joseph had faith in God. Now, what's interesting here is everything I just told you about is not the specific example that the writer of Hebrews uses in Hebrews 11, verse 22. In fact, if you notice here in the text, at Hebrews chapter 11, verse 22, the writer of Hebrews says, by faith Joseph at the end of his life made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave directions concerning his bones. Now this is recorded for us in the final chapter of Genesis, chapter 50, verses 24 and 25. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph had faith that God was going to keep his promise to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, his forefathers. You remember what God had promised Abraham? He was going to make him into a great nation. He was going to give him so many descendants. They were going to be so numerous. Like the stars of the heavens, like the sand on the seashore. He was going to give him many, many descendants. He was going to bring him into a great land. And Joseph, by faith, made mention of the Exodus. The Exodus is described in the next book, the book of Exodus. And in that book, we have recounted for us how God brought his people out of a land of bondage, because what's going to happen is Joseph's going to die, and there's going to be a passage of time, and then eventually there's going to be a Pharaoh, a king in Egypt, who didn't know Joseph, and he's going to decide to enslave the people of Israel. But the God who promised Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the God who was with Joseph, hasn't forgotten his people. He brings his people out of that land of bondage. He brings them into the wilderness, and eventually he brings them into the land of promise. And here Joseph is expressing his faith in what God is going to do. So here we see, once again, like we've seen in the weeks leading up to this, 3 more examples of faith. The faith of Isaac, the faith of Joseph, the faith of Jacob. Church, what are we doing by faith today? In what way are we acting by faith? Did we show up today by faith? Did we show up today by faith, believing in the truth of the gospel, believing in the message of the Bible? When we read Genesis 27, and we read about the actions of Rebekah and the actions of Jacob in deceiving Isaac, do we believe we're reading that which actually happened? That we're reading history? When we read the story of Joseph, or when we hear the story of Joseph recounted for us, and we hear about Joseph being sold as a slave, and we hear about Joseph being thrown in prison, and we hear about God raising him up to such high position in the Egyptian government, do we believe that we're reading that which actually happened? When we read the story of Jesus being born of the Virgin Mary, living a sinless life, going to a cross and dying for our sins, being placed in a tomb, and then early in the morning on the first day of the week, the tomb being discovered empty because he was raised from the dead. When we read those stories, do we believe them to be true? By faith do we show up because we believe the truth of the Bible. By faith do we show up because when we've gathered into this space together, as we lift up our voices and as we lift up our souls, that we are actually communicating to a God who is, and a God who hears, and a God who is pleased with the worship his people offer him. Do we serve by faith? You know, there's a lot of people that serve in the life of First NSB. And I've said it before, I'm sure others have said it before, we can't do everything we do at First NSB without the people who give of their time and their energy to do it. Like, we just can't. We could not do everything we do without the people who are willing to give of their time to do it. Do we serve by faith? This afternoon, we've got a servant appreciation lunch, and it's for anybody in the life of our church who serves in any capacity. Whether it is an out front, obvious way of serving, or it's a behind-the-scenes way of serving. We want to say thank you. We want to express appreciation. Because as a spiritual family, we all have a responsibility. We all have a role to play. We all contribute. Do we serve by faith? Do we give of our time and our energies by faith, believing that what we do matters? Right? Do we show up for whatever our assignment is, for whatever we've been assigned to, or whatever we volunteer to do? Do we show up believing, you know what, this is a small thing, but it matters? I told you about my kids who are not so small anymore. Rachel and I have sought to point them to Jesus. We've sought to teach them the truths of God's Word, and we haven't done it perfectly. We've got lots of room for growth. My boys know that I am far from perfect, and I've had to apologize to them on many, many occasions for when I've been unkind, or I've yelled, or I've been impatient. But God works through imperfect, believing moms and dads to raise up disciples. And my boys aren't perfect examples of disciples, but they're believers in the Lord. And while they do it imperfectly, they're living for the Lord. But it's not just Rachel and I, it's a church family. Because over the course of their lives, it hasn't just been Rachel and I that have had spiritual influence in their lives, it's been a church family. Our kids were in the Awana ministry. They used to be little guys in the nursery. Now they're in our youth ministry. How many people in the life of First NSB have had a little bit of a touch in their life? It matters. These little ones that were here with their parents on the platform. While those parents have primary influence in their lives, what kind of a touch will the people of First NSB have in them to influence them and to point them to Jesus? Church, we serve by faith, and what we do, it matters. It matters that we show up here. It matters that we pray the prayers we pray. It matters that we give of ourselves week in and week out. It matters. The Apostle Paul, at the end of a long discussion on the resurrection of Jesus and our future resurrection of believers, ends the 15th chapter of 1 Corinthians with these words. All right, so he's been talking about the resurrection of Jesus, and he's talked about our future resurrection, our future hope. And then he ends with these words, "Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain." He's writing to the brothers and the sisters in the church. He's just talked about the historical truth of the resurrection of Jesus and the fact that all of us as believers will one day receive resurrection bodies. And he says, therefore, in light of this, my spiritual brothers and sisters, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. Church, when we live by faith, when we serve by faith, it is no waste. It is not in vain. When Isaac acted by faith, when Jacob acted by faith, when Joseph acted by faith, it was not in vain. Church family, as we continue to live our lives by faith, as we walk with Jesus daily by faith, it is not in vain. So let's keep serving the Lord in His church. Let's keep giving to support the mission of the Lord's church. Let's keep living our lives for Jesus where we live, work, and play, and let's do it by faith, knowing that it's not in vain. It's not. I'll close with verse 6 of Hebrews 11. And without faith, it is impossible to please Him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that He exists and that He rewards those who seek Him.